Have you ever looked in a mirror and realized that the person staring back at you isn't you? Not the real you, but the version you built to please your parents, impress your friends, keep the peace, or avoid criticism. Somewhere along the way, you traded in your own reflection for a mask. And the scariest part? That mask fits so well now that you've almost forgotten what your own face looks like. But here's a harder question. What if you live your entire life that way? What if you wake up one day at 70, 80, 90 years old, and you realize that almost every decision you made belonged to someone else? You dressed in their colors. You spoke in their language. You lived inside their map. And in the process, it's tradition, it's fear, it's the silent agreement we make when we choose to fit in instead of stand out. In this video, I'm going to challenge you, I'm going to dare you to take that life back. Not tomorrow, not next week, but today. By the end, you'll see exactly why the most dangerous thing you can do is to postpone being yourself, and why the only real failure is never showing up as the person you were meant to be. Before we dive deep, let me ask you for something small that makes a huge difference. If you find yourself nodding at any point in this video, if even one sentence makes you stop and think, hit that like button. It tells YouTube that this message matters, and it helps it reach people who might need this reminder more than you know. And if you want to join a community of people who are done living by someone else's script, tap subscribe and turn on the bell icon, because we explore ideas here that can completely rewire the way you see yourself and your life. And one more thing, if my work has ever made you pause, reflect, or change course in a way that mattered to you, consider using the super thanks button below. It's a way to directly support what I do and make sure these conversations keep happening. Every contribution, no matter the size, is a vote for more truth in a world drowning in noise. Now, let's start with an uncomfortable truth. You are outnumbered not by people, but by expectations. From the moment you could walk, someone was pointing toward the right direction. They told you what success looked like, and they drew it in thick, unshakable lines. The right schools, the right job, the right partner, the right home. And if you stayed inside those lines, you'd be safe. You'd be respected. You'd be invisible. Invisible to yourself, anyway. The reason so many people die with regret isn't because they failed at life. It's because they succeeded at the wrong life. They climbed ladders that were leaning against the wrong walls. They ran races toward finish lines they never chose. And here's the kicker. Society rewards you for doing that. It applauds you for conformity, for predictability, for making choices that make sense to everyone except you. But there's another way to live. And it starts with asking one question, a question that sounds simple, but can rearrange your entire world. What do I actually want? Not what you're supposed to want. Not what your peers want. Not what your parents sacrificed for you to want. What you want stripped of the scripts. Stripped of the applause, stripped of the fear of disappointing anyone but yourself. If that question scares you, you're not alone. It scared me. It scares almost everyone at first. Because when you start answering it honestly, you'll realize how many of your current choices don't line up with your truth. That's when the temptation to turn back is strongest. That's when the mask whispers, don't rock the boat. But rocking the boat is exactly how you get to shore. So today, I want you to imagine what your life would look like if you stopped renting it out to everyone else's dreams. Imagine the work you'd do, the people you'd be with, the places you'd live, if you gave yourself full permission to be who you already are underneath all the noise. This isn't theory. I've seen it happen. People in their 40s, 50s, 60s completely rewriting their lives, sometimes starting from scratch, and finally feeling that strange, quiet peace of being aligned with themselves. And no, it's not easy. But you know what's harder? Regret. By the end of this video, I'm going to give you something specific to try before the day, and something that will prove to you that you can take control back, that you can choose for yourself, even in small ways. Because change doesn't start with moving mountains. It starts with moving one stone. And if you stick with me, I'll show you exactly which stone to move first. So grab your coffee, close your other tabs, and let's talk about what it actually means to live and die as yourself. Because if you get this right, every other decision in your life becomes simpler. Not easier, but simpler. And that's where real freedom begins. Imagine a man named David, a man you might have seen in your own circle, perhaps even a reflection of yourself at certain moments. From the time he graduated college, David was obsessed with finding the magic shortcut to success. He was the guy who bought every self-help book that promised to unlock the 7 secrets or 10 unbreakable habits of the world's wealthiest people. His bookshelf looked like a shrine to success literature, each title screaming about millions made, dreams fulfilled, and destinies conquered. He attended seminar after seminar, spending weekends in ballrooms with hundreds of other hopefuls, scribbling down notes as a speaker with a wireless mic and an expensive suit declared that waking up at 4:30 a.m. and meditating for exactly 23 minutes would change his life forever. Every time he left one of those events, he felt like he had finally found the key. For a few weeks, maybe even a couple of months, he would follow the routine to the letter. He would buy the planner, set the alarms, drink the green smoothies, and fill his walls with vision boards covered in pictures of mansions, sports cars, and exotic vacations. And yet, time and again, it all faded. Life would get in the way, motivation would crumble, and David would find himself back at square one, scrolling through his phone late at night, looking for the next miracle formula. Decades passed this way. He went from his 20s into his 40s, always chasing, always tweaking, always believing the problem was that he hadn't yet found the right mentor, the right system, the right proven method. He was like a man wandering through a desert who kept spotting mirages, sprinting toward them, only to find sand under his feet. His hair grayed, his energy waned, and his dream of making it big quietly shrank into something more modest, just being financially stable and happy. But even that never came. When he looked back, he realized he'd spent more time learning about other people's paths than actually walking his own. David's story isn't unique, it's painfully common. We live in an age where there are thousands of books, courses, podcasts, and influencers all promising to show us exactly how to succeed. Type "how to be successful" into YouTube or Google, and you'll be drowning in advice within seconds. You can find entire channels dedicated to dissecting the daily routines of billionaires, the precise breakfast they eat, the exact minute they start work, the kind of chair they sit in, and the playlist they listen to while answering emails. It's presented as if success is a recipe, as if all you need to do is follow the steps in the right order and you, too, will bake the same cake. And yet, despite this flood of advice, the world is still full of people struggling financially, emotionally, creatively. Here's the paradox. If the formulas worked, if the checklists and 5 habits were truly universal, then by now, wouldn't we all be successful? Shouldn't we have entire cities filled with millionaires, fulfilled artists, and innovators changing the world every week? But that's not what we see. What we see instead are countless people like David chasing, mimicking, copying, and ending up frustrated, burned out, and wondering if there's something wrong with them. The truth is, there's nothing wrong with them. What's wrong is the idea that there's a one-size-fits-all roadmap to success. Part of the problem is that success stories are always told backward. We see the end result, the billionaire founder, the Grammy-winning musician, the best-selling author, and then we hear the neatly packaged narrative about how they got there. The story is smoothed out, edited and stripped of chaos, luck, and personal quirks, leaving only the principles they believe made the difference. And while those principles might have been absolutely essential for them, they might be completely useless or even harmful for you. It's like hearing about a world-class chef's favorite recipe and assuming that if you cook it exactly the same way, you'll become a Michelin-starred chef too. It ignores the years of instinct, mistakes, and personal taste that made that recipe work for them in the first place. We also have a cultural obsession with the idea of the hack, the quick trick that will make everything click into place. It's not new. It's just louder now because of the internet. People love the fantasy that they can leapfrog the years of struggle and trial by simply copying the blueprint of someone who's already made it. And that fantasy is profitable. Entire industries are built on selling it. You see it in $2,000 online courses promising you can make passive income in 6 months. In motivational seminars, where speakers swear you can manifest anything by repeating affirmations in the mirror every morning. In books that tell you the secret is as simple as wearing the same outfit every day to save decision-making energy. None of these things are inherently bad, in fact. Some of them might genuinely help certain people. But the danger is when they're sold as the only way. That's where people lose themselves. Think about how absurd it would be if we applied this thinking to sports. Imagine telling every basketball player they have to shoot exactly like Steph Curry to succeed. Sure, Curry is one of the greatest shooters in history, but his style works for him because of his height, his hand size, his training history, his instincts, all unique to him. Forcing every player to mimic him would ruin half their games. The same is true in life and business. Copying the exact steps of another person ignores the unique mix of talents, experiences, values, and even flaws that shape your own best path. The irony is, many of the people we admire didn't follow someone else's script at all. Steve Jobs famously dropped out of college and took a calligraphy class that had nothing to do with computers, yet that class influenced the beautiful typography on the first Macintosh. Oprah Winfrey didn't become the most influential talk show host by mimicking others. She broke the mold, creating a style that blended journalism with personal connection in a way no one else had done. Elon Musk didn't follow a neatly packaged career ladder. He jumped between industries, taking risks most experts would have warned against. These people didn't spend their lives searching for a formula. They spent their lives building one that worked for them. So why do we keep falling for the idea of a universal recipe for success? Part of it is fear. It's scary to step into the unknown without a map. It's comforting to believe that if we just follow the right steps, everything will turn out okay. It's the same reason people in ancient times consulted oracles, or why we still read horoscopes. We want certainty. The modern version is the success industry. We trade our time, money, and trust for the promise that someone else has already figured it all out. But here's the uncomfortable truth. No one has figured it out for you. They've only figured it out for themselves. At some point, you have to confront the possibility that the answer you're looking for doesn't exist in a book, a course, or a YouTube video, not even in this one. The answer is somewhere inside you, shaped by your life's particular blend of strengths, struggles, passions, and even contradictions. And until you start experimenting, failing, adjusting, and creating your own mix, you'll always be stuck in someone else's story. The people who truly stand out, the ones who make a dent in the world, don't waste their lives trying to fit into someone else's mold. They use the molds as inspiration, maybe even as tools, but they never confuse the mold for the masterpiece. And that leads to the real question, the one that strips away the noise and the hype. Does success really have a universal formula? Or is it something messier, more personal, something you can only build piece by piece through your own choices? Because if the former were true, you wouldn't be watching this. You would have followed the formula already, and your life would look exactly the way you want it to. The fact that you're here, searching, wondering, tells me you're ready to ask the harder question and maybe, finally, to stop chasing other people's answers and start looking for your own. We learn early that standing alone feels dangerous. Psychologists have long noted that belonging sits near the base of human motivation. The body treats exclusion as a threat. Brain imaging studies show that social rejection lights up regions associated with physical pain, which is why a cold shoulder can feel like a punch. The mind draws a simple lesson from that sting. Do not be the one who breaks the pattern. Conformity is not just learned. It is rehearsed by the body whenever approval floods us with warmth and disapproval tightens the chest. Philosophers warned about this long before lab coats measured it. Kierkegaard called the crowd a seduction that dissolves responsibility. Nietzsche described herd morality as comfort dressed up as virtue. Emerson told his readers to trust themselves because the world would push them into shapes that were easy to predict and manage. Beneath those warnings is the same observation. Human beings are pulled by the gravity of the group. That pull is not evil. It's how tribes survived winters and predators. In a modern city, rigid sameness can waste potential on a scale the village never imagined. The desire to blend does not arrive alone. It brings a logic that builds its own architecture. More validation from matching the mold, more anxiety at the thought of breaking it. Soon the question shifts from what do I want to what is the next approved step. The answer sits everywhere on billboards, in school counseling offices, on LinkedIn feeds populated with polished announcements that look like copy and paste victories. The culture writes a rhythm. We learn to clap on cue. History explains why this rhythm took the shape it did. During the Industrial Revolution, factories needed bodies that arrived on time, followed instructions, and could be swapped without disrupting a line. The old rural rhythms work when the sun dictates, pause when the season demands were replaced by the clock. Efficiency became the moral language of the age. The assembly line had no patience for improvisation. The rail system needed schedules more than stories. In that world, the ideal worker looked like a reliable cog, punctual, obedient, measurable. You can hear the echo of that ideal every time a job description lists ability to multitask, works well under pressure, and team player but never lists sees what no one else sees or courageous enough to halt the line when the line is wrong. Education adapted to feed that machine. Consider the design choices we still treat as neutral. The bell that ends a class is not a law of nature. It is the school's version of factory whistle. Rows of desks facing a single authority mirror the floor manager and the line. Age-graded classrooms and standardized curricula assume the main job is to process cohorts efficiently, not to cultivate odd, stubborn talents that ripen on their own clocks. The report card translates messy human growth into tidy numbers, the way a foreman might tally output. Even the length of periods, 45 or 50 minutes, owes more to scheduling math than to the cadence of curiosity. You could walk into a school from 100 years ago and recognize the core choreography. Sit, listen, repeat, remember, produce on command. That choreography is excellent at building punctuality and ritual compliance. It is less excellent at producing original composers, contrarian scientists, or entrepreneurs who are willing to break a model that once worked. To be clear, mass education delivered real gains: literacy, numeracy, public health, mobility. But its hidden curriculum, the lessons absorbed by posture and habit taught children that there is a correct answer waiting at the back of the book, that speed equals competence. That mistakes should be erased rather than examined, and that authority is comfortable with questions only so long as they arrive at the appointed time. Those lessons were adaptive for an industrial economy that prized predictability. They become constrictive in an environment where value is created by insight no algorithm has yet formalized. If you think this is abstract, look at familiar scenes. A high school senior loves drawing comics, stays up late mapping worlds in a sketchbook, and feels alive doing it. Counselors, with the best intentions, steer her toward a practical degree and a standard internship, because that is the pipeline they know. The parents, remembering how precarious money felt, prefer the safety of a title and a salary. The student complies, excels, and steps into a role where the company praises her reliability. A decade later, she manages projects, earns performance bonuses, and cannot remember the last time she drew for its own sake. This is not failure. It is success defined by proximity to the model. The cost is invisible. A muted talent that might have become a graphic novelist, a game designer, or an art director had the system been built to spot and nourish the outlier rather than normalize her into a spreadsheet. Another scene. A young engineer in a large firm watches a broken process waste days across teams. He drafts an unorthodox fix that would require bending a policy most managers treat as sacred. Do not be the one who makes the room uncomfortable. He files away the proposal, not because it's wrong, but because the social math is unfavorable. The company just paid conformity tax, and it felt small and rational in the moment. Multiply that tax across months and teams, and you get a quiet erosion of what the firm could have been. The modern internet doubles the pressure. On platforms that reward sameness at scale, there's always a trending morning routine, a viral read these 5 books, a carousel of non-negotiable habits cut into identical fonts and colors. The subtext is moral. If you don't do these, you're unserious. So people adopt the optic journal's cold plunges, standing desks without asking whether those tools are solutions to their problems or prosthetics for someone else's. The algorithm is not trying to know you. It is trying to keep you. Its safest bet is to show you what people like you already clicked. You become a node in a feedback loop of imitation, and the loop feels like intelligence because it is so smooth. But smooth is not the same as true. Philosophically, the fear of standing alone is the fear of owning your choices without a crowd to blame. Existentialists insisted that freedom hurts because it brings responsibility. Once you accept there is no universal checklist, you cannot outsource your life to a rubric. That weight explains why the model person is so attractive. If you follow the model and things go wrong, at least you can say you did what everyone said you should. If you depart from it and stumble, the failure feels naked. But there's another weight hiding on the other side, the quiet regret of looking back and seeing that, year after year, you outsourced not just your decisions but your taste, your schedule, even your sleep to whatever was fashionable. Beware the life that is comfortable to explain and impossible to inhabit. The Industrial Revolution's template still shapes how we judge merit. Standardized tests promise objectivity by ranking students on identical questions under identical time pressure, as if creativity, persistence, and pattern spotting were separable from context. Annual performance reviews quantify contributions in boxes with numbers that invite comparisons across departments with wildly different realities. Job postings ask for years of experience in a tool that did not exist 5 years ago, then filter resumes by keyword density, treating the mess of lived competence like an inventory sheet. These devices are not malicious, they are efficient. They allow institutions to process volume. But efficiency can confuse the valuable with the visible. A culture that overvalues the measurable will underinvest in the meaningful parts of work, the slow apprenticeship, the meandering conversation, the hunch that later proves decisive. You can see the inheritance in language. We praise rock stars and ninjas, but we interview for compliance. We tell children to think outside the box, then penalize them when they do it on the exam. We celebrate founders who ignored the crowd, then build corporate ladders that reward the safest hands. Even entrepreneurial advice often hardens into its own orthodoxy. Launch this way, raise capital that way, pivot on this timeline, ship on that cadence. The playbook may be sensible, even wise, but wisdom becomes dogma when context disappears. The founders we idolize often succeeded because they read their moment precisely, not because they followed a static script. Copying the moves without the context is like reciting jokes in a foreign language. You get the words right and miss the laughter. It helps to acknowledge why the model person persists. It lowers coordination costs. Schools can run on time. Companies can plan headcount. Governments can forecast. Parents can sleep. There is mercy in predictability. The aim is not to sneer at systems, but to notice when the system's comfort conflicts with the individual's unfolding. The student who needs 3 uninterrupted months to turn a messy idea into a real prototype will rarely find that space in a semester carved into 6 compartments. The employee who would revolutionize a process if allowed to break it for a week will rarely receive that permission when metrics punish variance. When a system prioritizes smooth throughput, it treats outliers as friction, but the outlier is often where tomorrow's value hides. A more humane approach would treat belonging and individuality as twin needs, not enemies. People do better when they feel seen by a group and trusted as an idiosyncratic mind. You can build classrooms where the bell still rings, but students spend whole afternoons in deep work on projects that matter to them. You can run teams where deadlines exist, but the manager defends the weirdo who is onto something. You can conduct hiring that respects credentials without confusing them for capability by asking candidates to walk you through the ugliest problem they've ever solved and what changed in them while solving it. These are not rebellions. They are small corrections that admit the factory model solved yesterday's constraints, not today's. The roots of copying run deeper than fear and history. There's also a subtle metaphysics at play. Modern life tells us we are infinitely malleable. If we just bolt on the right habits, apps, supplements, and calendars, we can become anyone. There is truth in that hope we can grow. But there is also a quieter truth. We are not blank slates. Each person carries a shape, a temperament, a cluster of curiosities and limits. The point of education, work, and community is not to sand you into smooth sameness. It is to help you discover the grain you already have and learn to plane it well. When you work with your grain, you can go long without splintering. When you fight it, even success feels like a costume that pinches. Consider how often the culture asks us to swap ends and means. A teenager builds an app because he genuinely wants to solve a problem his friends have. It gains traction. People notice. Within a year, the goal shifts from solving the problem to matching the growth curves of the slide deck he saw online. He begins to copy the tactics of companies with different users and different cash realities. The app grows faster but feels emptier. He burns out and blames himself for lacking discipline. In truth, he abandoned the strange, specific intelligence that made the first version work because the model promised speed and status. He did not fail to follow the playbook. He failed by following it too well for a game he was not playing. When people ask why they chase other people's paths, they often expect a critique of vanity or laziness. The answer is more sympathetic. You chase because the culture makes chasing feel noble and resisting feel rude. Teachers, parents, managers, and coaches are measured by how well they guide people through established funnels. Few institutions are rewarded for saying, "This person needs a different path, and we will defend their deviation." It takes unusual courage to sit across from someone you care about and say, "I think the script you're following is wrong for you." Because if they bet on themselves and lose, you share the ache. Yet the generosity of that honesty can save a decade. If you want a practical test of whether you're copying the crowd or finding your edge, try this. Imagine removing the applause. No likes, no promotions, no tidy status labels. Would you still be doing the same work at the same pace in the same way? If the answer is no, ask whether your schedule is built around the bell or your best hours, whether your goals are yours or the loudest recommendation you heard this month, whether your reluctance to break a policy is about risk to the mission or fear of looking difficult. These are not easy questions. And there are seasons when prudence demands we average ourselves out, pay the rent, learn the basics, keep the lights on. But if every season looks like that, you are not being prudent. You're being erased. The point is not to overthrow the classroom, the office, or the timeline. The point is to see the water we swim in. Humans fear standing alone and seek the warmth of the group. History built systems that converted that preference into routine, training us to trust the template and distrust the detour. Those systems gave us literacy, longevity, and coordination at scale. They also taught us to treat the model as an idol and the outlier as a problem. The work of an adult life is to keep the belonging that steadies you and shed the copying that shrinks you. To learn when the bell is a helpful rhythm and when it is a habit that prevents you from hearing your own. When you understand the psychology that makes conformity feel safe and the history that made the model person profitable, you gain permission to step sideways, to adjust the script, to replace the question, how do I match the success template with a better one? Given the grain of who I am and the needs of this moment, what will be the most honest, useful thing to build now? Nikola Tesla and Albert Einstein could not have been more different in the way they approached something as basic as sleep, yet both became towering figures in science. Tesla claimed he slept only 2 or 3 hours a night, supplementing with brief naps during the day. He saw sleep as a kind of inefficiency, a biological need to be minimized so he could focus on experiments, designs, and endless calculations. Einstein, on the other hand, sometimes slept as much as 11 hours a night. He valued rest as essential to the kind of deep, abstract thinking that defined his work in theoretical physics. If you were looking for the right sleep schedule for genius, the lesson is not about how much sleep to get, it's that each had an intimate understanding of his own rhythm and refused to let popular opinion or conventional wisdom dictate it. If Tesla had tried to operate like Einstein, he might have felt sluggish and uninspired. If Einstein had forced himself into Tesla's sleepless schedule, his brain would have been too foggy for the elegant thought experiments that led to the theory of relativity. They didn't chase a prescribed formula. They built their lives around what worked for them. The same principle shows up in the tech world with people like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, two entrepreneurs who changed entire industries, but did so through very different styles. Jobs was a perfectionist to the point of obsession. He could spend hours on the curvature of a single icon or the feel of a button on an iPhone, believing that users might not consciously notice the detail, but would sense its presence. He was known for his relentless focus on design, aesthetics, and creating a total experience for the customer. Musk, by contrast, thrives on bold, high-risk bets across multiple industries simultaneously: electric cars, reusable rockets, neural interfaces, solar energy. He is less interested in crafting the perfect detail than in moving at breakneck speed to make something possible that experts say cannot be done. If Jobs had tried to run Apple the way Musk runs SpaceX, it might have imploded under constant iteration and risk. If Musk tried to run Tesla like Jobs ran Apple, the company might still be perfecting its first model instead of shipping vehicles worldwide. Their successes are not proof of a shared formula. They're proof that a person can succeed by leaning fully into their own strengths and tolerances. This willingness to walk a different path is not limited to the famous names in tech or science. Consider Vincent van Gogh, whose work is now worth hundreds of millions, but who sold almost nothing in his lifetime. The art world of his era valued academic painting, realistic portraits, and pastoral scenes rendered in muted tones. Van Gogh's swirling, emotive brushstrokes and vivid, almost violent colors were considered crude, even ugly, by many critics. He didn't paint to match the marketplace. He painted because it was the truest expression of what he saw and felt. He lived in poverty and obscurity. Yet the same qualities that alienated him from the crowd became the very things that defined his genius after his death. If he had bent his style to fit the trends of the day, we might never have seen the raw intensity of Starry Night or Wheatfield with Crows. In literature, think of Emily Dickinson. At a time when poetry was often public and social, read aloud in salons or published in magazines, she chose seclusion. She rarely left her family home, wore white clothing almost like a uniform, and wrote nearly 2,000 poems that she kept in drawers rather than send to publishers. Her style was unconventional: short lines, slant rhymes, abrupt shifts in tone. Editors might have corrected her work to fit the standards of the time, smoothing its sharp edges. By keeping it private, she protected its originality. It wasn't until after her death that the world began to see the depth and modernity of her voice, a voice that would have been diluted if she'd aimed to please the crowd. In science, there's Barbara McClintock, a geneticist who in the 1940s discovered jumping genes, or transposable elements, pieces of DNA that can move to different positions within the genome. Her peers at the time were skeptical to the point of dismissal. The idea didn't fit the accepted models of genetics. Rather than force her work into the prevailing frameworks, she stepped back from publishing for a while, continuing her experiments quietly. Decades later, her findings were confirmed, earning her the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. If she had abandoned her odd results to align with consensus, the discovery might have been delayed for a generation. Philosophy offers another example in Søren Kierkegaard, a Danish thinker in the 19th century who chose to critique both the established church and the popular philosophical trends of his time. While Hegelian philosophy aimed for grand, all-encompassing systems, Kierkegaard focused on the individual's subjective experience of existence, faith, and choice. He often wrote under pseudonyms, crafting works that explored ideas from multiple perspectives rather than presenting a single authoritative voice. His approach was considered eccentric, even marginal, during his life. Yet today, existentialist thinkers and theologians see him as foundational. Kierkegaard's refusal to merge into the philosophical mainstream preserved insights that would later speak directly to the anxieties of modern life. What's striking about all these figures, Tesla, Einstein, Jobs, Musk, Van Gogh, Dickinson, McClintock, Kierkegaard, is that their divergence was not rebellion for rebellion's sake. They weren't contrarians just to stand out. They were loyal to a way of working, thinking, or living that matched their own internal compass. The crowd's path simply didn't fit, and they had the nerve to keep walking when no one else was on the road. That nerve often comes with a cost. Many faced ridicule, isolation, or financial hardship. Van Gogh endured mental illness and poverty. Dickinson faced a kind of social invisibility. McClintock experienced professional skepticism that sidelined her career. Even Jobs was ousted from Apple at one point. Yet the alternative, squeezing themselves into a mold that didn't fit, would have cost more in the long run. These stories also show that the payoff for walking your own path is not always immediate. Sometimes it takes years, even decades, for the world to catch up. In a culture obsessed with instant validation, likes, shares, quarterly results, that's a difficult truth to swallow. If you measure your worth only by short-term applause, you'll be tempted to smooth out the edges that make you unique. But if you take the long view, as these individuals did, you see that originality has a compound interest. The longer you stay true to it, the more powerful it becomes. It's tempting to think these examples are exceptions, that the average person doesn't have the luxury to ignore the crowd. But walking your own path doesn't have to mean becoming a household name or reinventing an industry. It can mean choosing a career that aligns with your values rather than the one that offers the biggest paycheck. It can mean raising your kids in a way that honors their personalities instead of copying the latest parenting trend. It can mean starting a small business in your hometown instead of chasing venture capital in a big city, because that's what everyone says is serious. The scale doesn't matter. The principle does. One lesser-known example comes from the culinary world. Asma Khan, a self-taught chef from India who opened Darjeeling Express in London. Instead of hiring trained professionals, she built her kitchen staff entirely from immigrant women who had never worked in restaurants but cooked traditional dishes in their homes. In an industry obsessed with formal training and Michelin stars, her approach was seen as naive. Yet her restaurant earned critical acclaim, and she became the first British chef featured on Netflix's Chef's Table. She succeeded not by replicating the fine dining blueprint, but by amplifying the strengths of a model no one else was using. In sports, there's Dick Fosbury, who revolutionized the high jump in the 1968 Olympics. Before Fosbury, jumpers used techniques like the straddle or scissors, going over the bar face first. Fosbury developed a method of going over backwards, head first, arching his body in a way that looked strange and even comical at first. Coaches doubted it, commentators mocked it, but he won gold and set a new Olympic record. Today, the Fosbury flop is the standard technique worldwide. His success came from solving the problem in a way that fit his own body mechanics, rather than copying the established form. Even in business leadership, look at Yvon Chouinard, founder of Patagonia. While most companies focus relentlessly on growth and profit, Chouinard built his brand around environmental activism, high-quality gear, and a willingness to discourage unnecessary consumption. In 2022, he and his family transferred ownership of the company to a trust that will ensure all profits go toward fighting climate change. That decision baffled traditional business analysts, but resonated deeply with customers who share those values. Chouinard's path shows that doing things differently can work on a scale that challenges entire industries. The thread connecting all these stories is not luck, though luck plays a role in every life. It's the discipline of knowing oneself well enough to reject paths that don't fit even when those paths are paved, popular, and praised. It's the patience to let your work develop outside the spotlight, if that's what it needs. It's the courage to endure misunderstanding until the results speak for themselves, or even if they never do. To find satisfaction in the integrity of the attempt. Following your own path doesn't guarantee success, at least not in the conventional sense. Tesla died in relative obscurity, and Van Gogh never saw the wealth his art would generate. But success here is not only about money or fame. It's about the rare alignment between your actions and your deepest convictions. That alignment can bring a form of fulfillment the crowd can't give you. Because the crowd's applause is conditional, it lasts only as long as you keep giving them what they expect. The moment you step off their approved path, the applause fades. What remains is whatever you've built for yourself. If there's a takeaway from Tesla's sleepless nights, Einstein's long mornings, Jobs' design obsession, Musk's audacious bets, Van Gogh's fearless colors, Dickinson's private verses, McClintock's stubborn experiments, Kierkegaard's lonely philosophy, and all the others. It's this: there's no single right way. There's only the way that fits the shape of your mind, your body, your temperament, your values. The more you honor that shape, the greater your chances of doing work that matters not just to the world, but to you. And that, in the end, might be the only kind of success worth chasing. In ancient Greece, the phrase, "Know thyself," was carved into the stone at the temple of Apollo at Delphi. It was more than a clever slogan. It was considered a sacred directive. The Delphic maxim didn't mean simply remembering your name, your family, or your job. It meant understanding the limits and capacities of your nature, recognizing your own patterns of thought and feeling, and, most importantly, taking responsibility for who you are. To the Greeks, self-knowledge was the foundation of wisdom, because without it, you would mistake borrowed values for your own and live according to illusions. Socrates built much of his method around this principle, asking questions that stripped away the pretenses and hand-me-down beliefs people carried, forcing them to confront the gap between what they thought they knew and what they truly understood. To know thyself was to avoid hubris, the dangerous arrogance of thinking you were more than human, above the natural order, or immune to error. Over the centuries, the phrase traveled through philosophy, theology, and literature, gathering new shades of meaning. By the time we reach Friedrich Nietzsche, the call to self-knowledge has shifted into a call to self-creation. Nietzsche saw modern life as plagued by herd morality, a set of values imposed by the majority that rewards conformity and punishes difference. For him, knowing yourself wasn't just a passive recognition of traits. It was an active confrontation with the truth of your instincts, desires, and potential. He believed that most people bury those truths under layers of obedience to tradition, religion, or popular opinion. The task then was to dig them up, to face the uncomfortable fact that your life is yours to shape, and that there is no divine blueprint guaranteeing that the shape will be beautiful or applauded. The individual who accepts this burden, Nietzsche argued, becomes capable of creating new values, a kind of moral artist who can sculpt a life that reflects their deepest nature rather than the pre-approved templates of the crowd. Ralph Waldo Emerson, writing in 19th century America, echoed this spirit in his essay Self-Reliance. He urged readers to trust the iron string of their own intuition, warning that society is a joint stock company where members agree to surrender their liberty for the sake of conformity. Emerson understood the temptation to look outward for validation, to wait for the endorsement of others before acting, but he saw that as a path to mediocrity. His version of know thyself meant listening closely to the voice inside you and having the courage to act on it, even when it contradicts the voices around you. For Emerson, greatness depended on the refusal to be bound by yesterday's conclusions if today's understanding demanded a new direction. It was about living in a constant state of honest conversation with yourself. Existentialist philosophers took these threads and tied them to the idea of freedom. Thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir argue that human beings are condemned to be free. There is no predetermined essence or cosmic script that dictates what you must become. You exist first, and then you define yourself through your choices. This freedom is exhilarating, but it's also heavy. Without a universal map, you cannot blame fate, tradition, or divine decree for the shape of your life. You have to own it. Know thyself, in existentialist terms, means facing the reality that you are the author of your own meaning. It's not enough to discover what you're like. You must decide, in the absence of guarantees, what kind of person you will be. Every action is a vote for the person you're becoming. These philosophical currents converge on a crucial point: the danger of outsourcing your identity. Without self-knowledge, you become a patchwork of other people's expectations, family, peers, media, authority figures stitched together by the desire to belong. You chase goals because they are nearby, not because they matter to you. You measure yourself with someone else's ruler. And when you come up short, you think you failed. In reality, you might be excelling at something that ruler was never meant to measure. This is why self-knowledge is not an abstract luxury. It's a practical necessity. It determines whether your success will feel like victory or like a costume you wear until it exhausts you. Defining success for yourself begins with interrogating the sources of your desires. Ask why you want what you want. Is it because you've examined it in the light of your own values? Or because it's the next item on a cultural checklist? For example, you might feel pressure to buy a house by a certain age. But if you know that your happiness thrives on mobility and minimalism, that purchase might be a trap rather than a milestone. Another person might be driven to climb the corporate ladder because that's what ambition is supposed to look like. But if their deepest satisfaction comes from working directly with people rather than managing them, reaching an executive role could actually pull them further from themselves. Think about how different this looks in real life. An artist who knows themselves might choose to work part-time at a job that pays the bills while dedicating the rest of their time to their craft, even if it means never hitting a six-figure salary. A teacher who knows themselves might reject an administrative promotion because they understand that the joy and purpose they find in the classroom cannot be replicated in meetings and paperwork. A parent who knows themselves might ignore the endless race for their child to be in every extracurricular activity, recognizing that a calmer, less scheduled home life is what nurtures their family best. The alternative, allowing others to define success for you, can lead to a subtle kind of alienation. You achieve the things you were told to pursue, but they don't satisfy you. You feel an odd emptiness after each milestone, and so you set the next one, hoping it will fill the gap. This cycle can last decades. People retire from careers they never loved, wondering why the celebration feels hollow. They look back and realize they never paused to ask if the ladder they were climbing was leaning against the right wall. Self-knowledge also guards against the illusion of universality in success stories. When you read about a CEO who swears by 5 a.m., workouts, or an artist who insists inspiration only comes at midnight, it's tempting to see those habits as magical keys. But those are artifacts of that person's particular nature, life circumstances, and context. Without knowing yourself, you'll try to graft those artifacts onto your own life, hoping for the same results, and feel frustrated when they don't fit. With self-knowledge, you can see them for what they are: examples, not commandments, and adapt them to your own rhythms. Freedom, in this sense, is not the absence of limits. It's the ability to choose your limits consciously. Every life is shaped by constraints: time, energy, resources, biology. But when you know yourself, you can select which constraints serve your goals and which ones suffocate them. Nietzsche's "Become Who You Are" and Emerson's "Trust Thyself" both point to this. Your task is to take the raw material of your nature and the facts of your circumstance and shape them into a form that is yours alone. That might mean accepting that you'll never be a morning person and designing your schedule accordingly. Whether your best work happens in solitude and arranging your career to protect that solitude. It's worth noting that knowing yourself is not a one-time epiphany. It's a lifelong process of observation, experimentation, and adjustment. You might think you know your priorities at 20, only to discover at 30 that they've shifted. Life experiences, successes, failures, relationships, all of them can alter the terrain of your identity. The commitment is not to a fixed self, but to an ongoing honesty with yourself. This is where existentialism's emphasis on choice becomes so powerful. You're never done defining yourself. Each decision is an opportunity to align more closely with who you are now, not just who you were when you first set your goals. Ultimately, the philosophical lineage from Delphi to Nietzsche, Emerson, and the existentialists offers a counterweight to the pull of conformity. It reminds us that while it's natural to be influenced by others, the final responsibility for your life rests with you. To know thyself is to understand that no one else can walk your path, and therefore no one else can tell you with certainty where it should lead. It's to accept that the metrics the world hands you, salary, titles, likes, followers, are at best partial indicators, and at worst distractions from the deeper question: am I living in a way that reflects my own considered values? Without that anchor, freedom can feel like drift. With it, even a modest life can be rich with meaning because it is yours, built by choices you can stand behind without apology. One of the most practical ways to start finding your own path is to slow down enough to actually see yourself clearly. This means doing more than listing your job skills or your likes and dislikes. It means conducting a deep inventory of your values, talents, and the moments in your life when you felt most alive. A good place to begin is with your values. Ask yourself what principles matter so much to you that violating them would make you feel like a stranger in your own skin. Others value stability and will trade some flexibility for the peace of mind that comes with security. Some value creativity, others service, others mastery, others community. The important thing is not which values you choose, but that they're truly yours, not borrowed from a book or a mentor or a culture that has its own agenda. You can test this by imagining two jobs with the same pay, one that honors your values and one that violates them. The job you pick in your gut tells you more than any personality quiz ever could. Once you have your values in view, turn to your talents. This is not just about what you're good at now, but about the kinds of tasks that seem to come more easily to you than to others. Often, these are so natural to you that you dismiss them as unremarkable. The friend who can walk into a chaotic kitchen and intuitively organize a dinner for 12 without stress doesn't think of logistical orchestration as a skill, but it is. The coworker who can rephrase complicated instructions so everyone understands is exercising a talent for translation not between languages, but between minds. To uncover these, ask people who know you well to name times when they've seen you at your best. Patterns will emerge. You'll start to notice that certain types of problems make you curious instead of drained, or that you enjoy certain processes that others avoid. Your childhood memories can also be a rich source of clues. Before the full weight of should settled on you what you should study, how you should behave, what you should want, you were drawn to certain activities purely for the joy of them. Maybe you built elaborate forts out of cardboard boxes. Maybe you spent hours sketching in the margins of your school notebooks. Maybe you were the kid who organized the neighborhood soccer games. Those early patterns are not random. They often reflect the core of what still energizes you. An adult who loved building forts as a kid might thrive in architecture, event planning, or any field that involves creating environments. The doodler might find satisfaction in design, illustration, or visual storytelling. The game organizer might excel in leadership roles that involve motivating a team toward a common goal. Identifying the things you do well without exhaustion is another powerful filter. This doesn't mean everything will be easy. Meaningful work often involves effort, but there's a difference between the tiredness that comes from overwork and the deep satisfaction that comes from immersion. Psychologists call it flow, the state where you're so engaged that you lose track of time. Think of a musician practicing for hours without looking at the clock, or a programmer who forgets to eat lunch because they're absorbed in solving a problem. Pay attention to the activities where the challenge feels stimulating rather than crushing, where you finish with a sense of satisfaction rather than relief that it's over. These are strong indicators of where your natural strengths and passions overlap. Of course, even if you know your values, talents, and sources of flow, finding your path is complicated by the constant noise from the outside world. Social media amplifies this noise by giving you a curated feed of other people's highlight reels. You scroll through images of people your age buying houses, traveling to exotic locations, launching companies, publishing books, and you start to question whether your own pace or direction is wrong. It's important to remember that these feeds are not neutral windows into reality. They are carefully selected and edited narratives. You rarely see the debt behind the house, the loneliness on the trip, the failed projects before the company launch, or the years of rejection before the book deal. If you treat social media as a benchmark for your own life, you're comparing your behind the scenes to everyone else's polished front stage. Filtering this noise starts with setting boundaries. You can control how much time you spend on platforms and who you follow. Curate your feed to include people who inspire you without making you feel like you're constantly behind. Follow creators who show the process, not just the outcome. So you're reminded that every success story has a messy middle. If a certain account consistently makes you feel inadequate, mute it even if it belongs to someone you know personally. Protecting your mental space is not pettiness, it's discipline. Family can be another source of noise, even when it comes from love. Parents and relatives often give advice based on what worked for them or what they believe will keep you safe. If your parents lived through economic hardship, they might push you towards stable but uninspiring careers. If they found fulfillment in a certain path, they might assume you will too. It's worth listening to their concerns. They often come from experience, but it's also worth recognizing that their perspective is shaped by a different time, a different job market, and a different set of values. You can acknowledge their wisdom without surrendering your autonomy. One way to do this is to separate the intent from the content. Appreciate the care behind their advice, but evaluate the specifics against your own self-knowledge. Society at large adds another layer of pressure by elevating certain milestones as markers of success. Graduating at a certain age, owning property, marrying, having children, hitting specific income levels. These markers can be meaningful if they align with your values, but they can also become traps if you pursue them solely because they're expected. For instance, buying a house is a celebrated achievement, but if you thrive on travel and variety, a mortgage might feel like a chain. High income is often equated with success, but if earning it requires sacrificing the work-life balance you cherish, the cost may outweigh the benefit. To keep these external voices from drowning out your own, you can create intentional spaces for reflection. This might be as simple as a weekly walk without headphones, journaling in the morning before you check your phone, or taking occasional weekends offline. The goal is to give your own thoughts enough quiet to be heard. In these spaces, you can revisit the core questions. What do I actually want? What matters to me right now, not last year, not 10 years ago, not to the people around me, but to me? The more regularly you ask and answer these questions, the less likely you are to be pulled entirely off course by the latest trend or someone else's urgency. Another useful tool is experimentation. You don't have to know your path in advance to start moving toward it. Try projects, jobs, or hobbies that interest you on a small scale before making a full commitment. Treat them as prototypes, not life sentences. If you're curious about teaching, volunteer to lead a workshop. If you wonder about running your own business, start with a side hustle. Each experiment gives you data about what energizes you and what drains you, what fits your skills and what doesn't. Over time, these small tests can add up to a map that's much more accurate than any advice you could have gotten from the outside. It's also worth building a personal board of advisors, people you trust to give you honest feedback and who understand your values. This doesn't mean they agree with you on everything. In fact, some disagreement can be useful, but they should respect your autonomy and be invested in your growth rather than in you following their script. Having a few voices you can check in with helps counterbalance the louder, less discerning noise of the crowd. Ultimately, finding your own path is less about making one perfect choice and more about cultivating the ability to make course corrections as you go. Self-analysis, attention to your effortless strengths, and intentional noise filtering all work together to keep you oriented. The more you practice these skills, the more confidence you'll have in saying no to paths that don't fit, even if they're popular, and yes to the ones that might look strange to others but feel right to you. The world will always be noisy, and the crowd will always have opinions. But when you've done the work to know yourself and guard your attention, those opinions lose their power to steer your life. If you don't live as yourself, your entire life belongs to someone else. You can spend decades building a resume that impresses your parents, neighbors, and former classmates, only to wake up one morning with a quiet realization that you have been an actor in a play you never auditioned for. The tragedy isn't just the wasted time, it's that the part you were meant to play has been sitting there, unperformed, while you busied yourself perfecting someone else's lines. You don't get that time back. The world doesn't get the version of you that might have existed. All those possibilities evaporate into the space where courage was supposed to be. The cruel truth is that no one will ever hand you the permission slip to be yourself. Even the people who love you most will sometimes prefer the version of you that fits their hopes or calms their fears. If you're waiting for the moment when everyone agrees that your path makes sense, you will wait until your hair turns gray. Life doesn't work like that. The agreement has to come from you first, and everyone else catches up later if they ever do. Living as yourself does not mean you disregard every opinion or advice. It means you weigh them against the scale of your own convictions. It means you are willing to take the heat for your choices, to own the results whether they are glorious or humiliating. The alternative is easier in the short term. Just follow the crowd, hit the milestones, tick the boxes, but it costs you something irretrievable. The deep satisfaction that comes from looking back and knowing that, whether you won or lost, you played your own game. The call to action is deceptively simple. Start now. Not after you read another book, not after you save a certain amount of money, not when the kids are grown or the market is perfect or you feel ready. There is no ready. You start by taking one thing you've been putting off: the painting class you keep telling yourself you'll sign up for, the blog you've been afraid to publish, the trip you've been researching for 5 years, and you do it. Not because it will change your life overnight, but because it will plant a flag in the ground that says, I'm capable of choosing for myself. That act, small as it might seem, begins to shift the center of gravity from other people's expectations to your own agency. Maybe you've convinced yourself that your dream is impractical or that it's too late. Those are just the voices of caution disguised as wisdom. The truth is, people have started over at 40, 50, even 70, and built lives that felt truer than the ones they lived before. Julia Child didn't learn to cook until her late 30s. Colonel Sanders franchised KFC in his 60s. The time will pass anyway. Better to spend it moving towards something that matters to you than to sit still in something that doesn't. Imagine your life as a canvas that, from birth, everyone around you begins to paint. Parents add strokes in the colors they think will suit you. Teachers fill in sections with their expectations. Friends, bosses, even strangers contribute dabs and lines until, one day, you step back and realize the painting looks nothing like the person you feel inside. Living as yourself means picking up the brush, even if it means painting over parts of the old work. Some of those earlier strokes might remain. They're part of your history. But the overall composition changes because now your hand is guiding it. Every choice is another brushstroke in your own style. There's a story about a man who, in his youth, dreamed of becoming a musician. He was talented, but his parents convinced him to choose a real career. He became an accountant, married, had children, bought a house, and did everything right by conventional standards. Decades later, after his kids were grown, he picked up his old guitar again. At first, his fingers were stiff, his voice rusty, but he practiced every day. He started playing at small local venues, then recorded a few songs, then toured with a group of friends. He never became famous, but when asked in his 70s if he had any regrets, he said, "Only that I waited so long to feel like myself again." His story isn't about chasing fame. It's about reclaiming a part of himself he had abandoned for half a lifetime. That's the cost of living for others, you still end up wanting the thing you denied yourself, only now with less time to enjoy it. Life will always offer you reasons to postpone being yourself. There will always be bills to pay, obligations to meet, people to please. But those things will exist whether you live your life or someone else's. The difference is in how you'll feel when the clock runs out. Will you be able to say you used your time as a tool to carve something uniquely yours? Or will you realize too late that you spent it maintaining a sculpture someone else designed? The invitation is not to burn your life down overnight, but to start inserting truth into it. Have the conversation you've been avoiding. These acts, small or large, are how you take your life back from the hands of everyone else and return it to where it has belonged all along with you. If you've made it this far, you already know the truth. The cost of living for other people's approval is nothing less than your own life. You can't buy that back. You can't bargain for more time once it's gone. And one day, whether you like it or not, you will be faced with the final audit as silent. Or did you play the part they handed you? I can't answer that for you. No one can. But I can tell you this: the moment you start choosing in alignment with who you are, the air feels different. Food tastes different. You wake up with a kind of electricity that no paycheck or title can match. And when you go to bed at night, you feel the quiet. They think living as themselves requires some grand, cinematic gesture. They imagine quitting their job in a blaze of glory, selling all their possessions, moving to a cabin in the woods. And maybe, for few it does, but for most, it begins smaller and it begins now. You don't have to know your entire path to take the first step. You just have to know which direction feels like yours. So here's what I want you to do before the day ends. Pick one thing you've been avoiding because you were worried about how it would look, what people would say, or whether it would make sense. Then do it. Send the message. Sign up for the class. Tell the truth you've been watering down. Make the decision you've been postponing. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be yours. And when you do it, notice what happens inside you. Notice the flicker of recognition, the sense that you've just opened a door you forgot existed. And subscribe to this channel if you want to keep getting these kinds of wake-up calls. And if you want to go one step further, hit the super thanks button. It's not just a way to support me. It's a way to say, I believe in this message and I want more of it in the world. Because here's the thing, these conversations don't exist to entertain you for a few minutes. They exist to plant something in you that will grow long after you click away. If all you do is watch and nod, nothing changes. If you take what you've heard and apply even a fraction of it, everything can. I want you to think about this. If a year from now, your life looked exactly the same as it does today, would you be happy? If the answer is no, then something needs to change. And that change won't happen because you wished for it. It will happen because you acted imperfectly and persistently in the direction of who you really are. There's a line I heard once that I've never forgotten. The two saddest words in any language are if only. If only I had tried. If only I had spoken up. If only I had taken a risk. Those words are heavy and they're unnecessary because you have the chance right now to make sure you never have to say them. So go. Start small if you must, but start. Refuse to be the character in someone else's story when you could be the author of your own. Stop waiting for permission that will never come. This is your permission. This is your moment. And when the credits roll on your life, let the story be unmistakably yours. Thank you for watching, for thinking, for daring to question. If you felt this was worth your time, let me know by hitting like, share it with someone you care about, subscribe if you haven't already, and consider showing support through super thanks so we can keep building this space for honest,